Hi, I'm Arin. This is Arin Reads. Welcome. Today we're going to talk about my top 10 favorite books of 2023. A couple of weeks ago, I put out like an honorary mentions video. My cat's down here, if you're curious about what I'm doing with my hands. But, like I was saying, I put out an honorary mentions video because there were so many books that I wanted to talk about. But today, we're doing the cream of the crop, the toppity top. It's been sort of a weird reading year for me. I put a big emphasis on trying to broaden my horizons because I was only reading in a couple of really specific subgenres, and that was it. And so a lot of this year has been some trial and error and reading a lot of books outside of my comfort zone. Some of them worked out really well, some of them didn't. I am glad that I had a sort of experimental reading year because it really broadened my horizons and made me realize all of these genres that I actually really enjoy that I just hadn't given a chance yet. So, all of that said, these are the top 10 of a kind of weird reading year. So are all of these in my permanent top favorites ever? No. But would I recommend all of them? Hell yeah. So, with all of that said, let's get into it. They are roughly in order. I wasn't super intense about it, but they're roughly in order. So, let's talk about number 10. Okay, so coming in at number 10 is Biography of X by Catherine Lacey. I read this one for Allison Page's Pocket Pages book club a few months ago, and I loved it. I loved this book. So this is a fake biography of a fake historical artist figure written by her wife after she passes. So X, that's the name of this artist, she has cut off her past, her old identity, and she just goes by X for most of her life. And her wife, after X passes, is uncovering all of these things about her wife that she didn't know, and realizing that the person that she thought she knew best in the world, she doesn't really know it all. And so we're going through and finding out all of these things about this fake historical figure. But my favorite part, and what made this tippity top for me, is that this book involves not only this fake historical figure, but a whole fake history. So in the universe that this takes place, the US has been split into the northern and the southern territories. So the southern territories were cut off, I think, during World War II. They were cut off. They became a theocratic fascist society. They're really closed off from the Northern Territory. It's really hard for people in the North to find out how the people in the South are being treated. And it's really, really hard to cross one way or the other. All of this is talked about through this one specific person's life. And so it's really accessible, but it's also really thoroughly developed. I could really sink my teeth into it. And I'm personally a huge history nerd, and so it was fun to read something that felt like a historical nonfiction book, but was completely fabricated. Was a lot of fun. There are all these, let's see, archival photos. There are these footnotes throughout. It's a little on the dense side, but I still found it accessible and a lot of fun. The characters were so interesting and engaging for me. And while this takes place in an alternate history, we still had real historical figures. So David Bowie's in here. I'm a huge Bowie fan. And it was so interesting to read about this mix of our world, our history, that's just tilted. It was so fun. I highly recommend it. At number 9 is a book that I'm sure you've already heard all about, so I'll keep it kind of short, but it's I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy, which is the only nonfiction in this list, but boy, howdy. This book made me feel so much. I devoured this book. Who knew that Jennette McCurdy could write like this? Unbelievable. I'm so excited to see what she does moving forward. But This is about Jeanette McCurdy. It's a memoir. She is Sam from iCarly, which I grew up watching. And it's all talking about her toxic relationship with her mom, who really forced her to be a child actor. So we get a lot about manipulative relationships. We get a lot about loving someone and hating someone at the same time. I mean, the emotional complexity and how she was able to hold multiple truths at the same time was so fascinating to read about. And we also get a lot of details about being a child actor and what stardom does to you from a really young age and how people in the industry treat child actors. It was just really, really phenomenal. There are definitely some big trigger warnings in this book, especially for abuse, of course, and alcoholism and eating disorders. But man, if you can handle it, I highly recommend this book. All right, next up at number 8 is The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. I'm a little late to the party on this one, but I'm really glad that I finally got to it. This book wrecked me. So Luca's feeling a little spicy, so I'm sorry if he gets loud in the background. But anyway, in The Invisible Life of Addie Larue, we follow Addie Larue, and she made a deal with a dark god spirit hundreds of years ago, allowing her to live forever. But the catch is that anyone that she meets will forget about her once they look the other way. So if she goes into the different room and comes back, they've forgotten about her. If they look away a second too long and look back, they've forgotten about her. For most of the book, we're following Addie as she survives. She goes from city to city over the course of hundreds of years and just figures out, how do you survive when no one can remember you? You have nowhere to live. You can't have a job. She's just like the pinnacle of a nomad. She can't plant roots anywhere, but she can live forever. So it's all about how she finds what makes life worth it without having these relationships. But eventually she finds someone who can remember her. And so trying to figure out, why can he remember her? You know, what are his secrets? What makes him different from everyone else? And the interesting, honestly, the shocking thing for me about this book was that I cared much more about this other character than I did about Addie. My only complaint is that I felt like Addie wasn't as developed as I would expect her to be, being the titular character, but the other characters were so interesting to me. Honestly, all of the other characters were so interesting to me that it really kept me going. When I got to the end of this book, I was reading it in my living room next to our front window, and I was sobbing, like ugly sobbing. And the mailman came up and was bringing a package, and I saw him walking up to the window, and I just ran into the bathroom and I was sitting on the edge of the tub continuing to read, weeping, just waiting for the mailman to go back to his truck so he wouldn't see me full ugly sobbing over this book. I really loved it. Next up, number 7 is another widely talked about book, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Oh my god. This was one of those books where I was a little not super convinced that I would love it, because I prefer genre fiction. You know what I mean? But everyone seemed to love this so much that I was like, I gotta figure out what's going on with this book. And boy, howdy, did this live up to the hype for me. So this is about two friends, Sam and Sadie, as their relationship evolves through time. They're enemies, they're best friends, they're the most important people in each other's lives, they're distant, you know? It follows their relationship as they work together creating video games. So they meet with their kids playing video games together in a hospital. And over time, their love for video games brings them together. They create video games together, and then the working relationship affects the friendship. It's hard to sell this because the premise kind of just sounds like, okay, yeah, that could be interesting. And especially if you're not into video games, then it can be like, why would I enjoy that? But the characters and their relationships were some of the most compelling I've ever read, to be perfectly honest with you. And the chronic pain representation really, really, really meant a lot to me. If you're new here and you don't know, I have fibromyalgia and autism, and we have a lot of talk in here about how meaningful video games can be for people who are disabled or have chronic pain or chronic illness, because it gives us a chance to experience things outside of our bodies. For a while, we can be Link, who can do all of these crazy things. He can climb mountains, he can fight, he can swim, like he can do anything. And we can be Link for a while and not be worried about being in pain for a week because we overexerted ourselves, or that we'll get dizzy if we are upright for too long, or, you know, whatever it is. And I related so deeply to that. And I think about it so often. This just really, really meant a lot to me. I really couldn't recommend it more. I know that it's extremely hyped, and honestly, if you haven't read it yet, me telling you to read it probably won't convince you, but just please trust me on this. These characters are worth every second. Okay, up next at number 6, we have the only romance on the list, which is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. Oh my god, you guys. I ate this up. I loved this book. So it is the first in the Bright Falls romance trilogy, which follows the romances of 3 friends in one friend group in this small town in Oregon. And while I love the whole series, the first one, Delilah Green Doesn't Care, I'm not sure what it was. I don't know what made this book rock my world, but boy howdy, it did. So this is about Delilah Green. She is a photographer. She's living in New York, and when she was really young, her father passed away, and this was pretty soon after he had married her second mom, her stepmom. And so after he passed, she lived with her stepmom and her stepsister, and they were very wealthy, waspy, very interested in appearances and etiquette and, you know, kind of the parents in Gilmore Girls, you know what I mean? And Delilah was mourning her father, was very artsy and different, and she has spent the rest of her life kind of running away from this family because she just feels like she was never a part of it. But when her sister gets married, she asks her to come be the wedding photographer. So she has to go back to Bright Falls. And when she gets there, she finds out that her sister's old best friend is looking pretty cute. Is divorced and bisexual, and oh my god, their relationship is amazing. Oh my god, I don't know how to appropriately describe how this book made me feel. This is the closest I've gotten with a romance book to feeling like I was in it, you know? And like, these butterflies are my butterflies, and I'm just kicking my little feet the whole time, and I cared so deeply about both of these main characters and their friends, their relationship. I understood why it was hard for them to be together, and I cared so much about them figuring it out. It was just, oh my god, I loved it, and I love Delilah Green. She's just one of my all-time favorite characters, and it's gay as hell. In 5th place is the book I actually read most recently, and that is The Reformatory by Tanana Reeve-Dew. This is my first Tananarive book, and it honestly blew my mind. I can't wait to read more from her. I'm so glad that I read this as soon as I could. Okay, so I'm going to start with the background for this book because I think it's extremely important to the overall experience of reading it. So about 10 years ago, Tananarive was informed that her great uncle, Robert Stevens, died at the Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida in 1937 when he was 15 years old. And she had never heard about this great uncle. None of her family had ever talked about him. And then the state let her know they found his body. He was buried on the premises. And so she spent a decade writing this book, which follows a fictional version of Robert as he's navigating being wrongfully put in this reformatory. Oh man, it is a tough read. This is not for the lighthearted, but Tananarive made it more accessible by making it supernatural. So this fictional version of Robert, who is our main character in this book, can see haints or ghosts. And when he gets to the reformatory, which, it's important to note, he has been sent to simply for kicking a white boy who was harassing his sister. So, diddly up, right? He gets to the reformatory and he can see the haints of the boys who have died at this reformatory before he got there. By making this story supernatural, Tananarive was able to take something so huge and painful that it's hard to even look at or think about or interact with at all, and make it still, don't get me wrong, very painful to read about. And very, just impossible for me, at least, as a white person to imagine, but made it so that I could sit with it and understand it better. It's just such a great example of how genre fiction can take real human stories and make them more impactful, make them more accessible, make you feel closer to them. I don't really know how else to describe that, but so much trauma and conflict and this huge injustice is brought through this filter of the supernatural in a way that was just so impactful. I don't even really know how else to talk about this book. It's a chunker, and because it's so long, you get to know the characters so deeply, and the strength of these characters, their resilience, the horrible things that they had to go through, and the found family, showing how relationships and love and family can get you through just about anything, was really inspiring to read about. But again, it's a tough read. I highly recommend it. It's worth it. And I don't want you to feel too intimidated by it, by what I'm saying, but I just want to be honest. It took a few weeks for me to read, longer than even other books of this length would have taken me, because I really had to take a lot of breaks, really think about it, really respect it and the time that it deserved. I couldn't recommend this enough. Up next, for number 4, is The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. So, context. I was a Pirates of the Caribbean kid. It was insane. I made black sails and put them up on the wall above my bed at my grandparents' house so I would feel like I was sleeping on the Black Pearl. I was obsessed. And I still love it. So I didn't realize how much I needed some pirate fantasy fiction in my life. And now I know. So this is a pirate fantasy following Amina al-Sirafi. And Amina has been retired for a while. She's older than most protagonists, which I loved. And she is kind of in hiding with her daughter because she's worried about enemies from her past coming for her and her daughter and the new life that they've built together. And one day, the mother of one of her ex-crewmates comes and asks her to find her granddaughter, that ex-crewmate's daughter. It's one of those things where she's offered so much money and it could set her and her daughter up for the rest of both of their lives. She feels like she can't say no. This is the first in a series, so a good chunk of this was getting the band back together, and I loved meeting all of these really fascinating side characters, and I'm so excited to get to know them better in the future. This was just adventure, adventure, adventure. I don't read a ton of like big cast, long book, epic fantasies, so I don't super know what I'm talking about here, but all I can say is that I had such a great time reading this. I loved the swashbuckling, I loved the scheming, I love figuring out what to do when the schemes go bad, I love the side characters, I loved Amina, she's hilarious. It was just such a fun adventure, and nothing lasted too long, nothing dragged out. It's pretty episodic. It's like a lineup of adventures, and I've heard that being a complaint about this book, but I loved it because nothing dragged out. I didn't get sick of any particular setting or mission or anything like that. It's long, but the pacing was like so quick that I just like had to keep reading. I had the best time. I'm so excited for more of these books to come out, and it also helped with my obsession with Our Flag Means Death and the very long hiatus between seasons 1 and 2. You should watch that show too, and read this book. Number 3 is a bit complicated. My number 3 book is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. When I tell you, I was physically nauseous through most of this book. When I tell you that when I see the cover, I get actual literal chills throughout my body. When I tell you that this book ruined about 2 weeks of my life this past summer. I read this book in 2 or 3 days, partially because I had to know what happened next, and partially because it was ruining my mental health and I needed it to end. So horror readers are so weird, and that's what I've been telling anyone who I talk about this book with, because truly, I had a horrible time reading this book, but I had a great time having a horrible time reading this book. So I can't tell you a ton about what this book is about. It's really best to go into this sucker blind, but we're following a man and his cat who live in this house on Needless Street, and a girl who is looking for the person who kidnapped her sister when they were young. Whew! I was disgusted, traumatized, I wept, I was terrified. I felt every emotion reading this book. Every emotion. And this is one of those books that have a lot of twists and turns, and usually I get annoyed with those. One of my least favorite books of the year was Riley Sager's most recent book. I can't remember what it was called. And it's a great example of why I usually don't like twisty books, where there were so many twists that I was like, okay, we get it. And all of them came out of nowhere, and I was like, is it a compelling twist if it's something you just made up out of nowhere and gave us no hints to? Like, that's a whole other story. But with this one, every single twist, every time it happened, I was like, you've been trying to tell me that this whole time. I didn't see it coming. I'm shocked, but now that I look back, you've been telling me this whole time. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. It is so well crafted. Ooh. So good. And so horrifying. I'm not saying that this is like an extreme horror. I'm not an extreme horror person. I'm not saying this is the scariest book ever written and it's gonna make you barf, you know? I'm not saying any of those things, but did this book lift me all the way up? Yes. A huge change of gears for number 2. We have A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This is a cozy sci-fi. It's 2 really short novellas. I kind of count them as one, don't hate me. But this is following a tea monk who is kind of sick of their life and their job and they want more. And so they go out on this trip to travel, to be one with nature, to learn about themselves and the world. And when they're out alone in the forest, they bump into Mosscap, one of my favorite characters of all time. So the thing to know about this society, this takes place in the future. After robots were introduced, did all of our work for us, were basically human servants. And then they said, we out. Like, don't talk to us. We're leaving. Like, we don't want to be doing this anymore. We don't love this relationship you and I have. All of us are gonna go live out in the wilderness and do whatever we want. And we'd love it if you never talk to us again. And the humans were like, respect, have fun out there. And started rebuilding their society on their own. And this, when Mosscap comes up to Dex, our tea monk, this is the first time that a human has seen or spoken to a robot in hundreds of years. And Mosscap has been sent by the rest of the robots to ask the question, what do people need? And Dex is like, okay, that's a huge question. Like, the answer is going to be different for every single person by every single minute. You know, like, that's just such a huge question. I could never answer that. So they go on this journey together as Dex does their tea monk thing, and Mosscap asks the people in the villages they're traveling through, what do you need? And learns about what it means to be human, what it means to be a robot, learns about life. I mean, it's just amazing. These are such accessible and cozy looks at different philosophical questions. Don't be intimidated by hearing philosophical. Like, it is so accessible and so interesting and wholesome and heartwarming. And it was also the first time that I've ever read a, like, post-breakdown sci-fi novel that wasn't the most depressing and scary thing I've ever read. This takes place in a society where humans actually step up and say, how can we take better care of each other and the planet? And that was just so, it was such a relief to read about. And again, my man Mosscap, I very genuinely want to get a Mosscap tattoo. I love Mosscap so much. Reading these 2 books was actually the very first reading vlog that I ever did, and they were just such a wonderful entrance into this booktube space. I love these books so much. They have such a special place in my heart, and I can't wait to reread them and reread them over and over again forever. And my number 1 of the year, the tippity top, the cream of the crop. I mean, this is like, along with the last couple, this is like all-time favorite in that zone, you know? It's up there. And I don't hear a ton of people talking about it. I don't know if I'm like completely alone. It's one of those books that I feel like was written specifically for me. Like, it ticks all of my boxes. So I don't know if this is my favorite because it's a great book, which I believe it is, or if it just was written specifically for me. This book is The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I am feral for this book. I'm feral for this book. So this follows 3 sisters who, when they're young, they're raised by their abusive father, and their mother's mother, their maternal grandmother, who still practices the old ways of witchcraft. Witches are said to no longer exist. There's only like little magic that mostly like maids use to keep shoes shiny. You know, it's looked down upon. It's mostly been wiped out because most people, especially the people who can't practice witchcraft, are afraid of it. These sisters escape their abusive father one by one and move to New Salem, a big city, and eventually they all collide together and come back together after years of not speaking at all. Each of these sisters is so lovable and fascinating and complicated, and their relationships with one another are so complex. All of them are like the most lovable and totally dislikable at some point through this book. They are so complicated and real, and I just felt like I knew each and every one of them, like they were real people. And watching them join the suffragist movement and trying to incorporate bringing magic back as part of the suffragist movement in this very religious town of New Salem, in this world where witchcraft has been looked down upon and wiped out for such a long time. They're so brave and stubborn and intelligent and just fascinating to read about. And when I say that it feels like this book was written specifically for me, first of all, we got witches. We got a big focus on books and libraries. We have a lesbian librarian main character. It was so good. It is everything I look for. It's historical fantasy, which I discovered this year of experimenting with my reading. I've discovered I love. This book was just everything to me. I tabbed it a bunch. I love this book. It will stay with me for a long, long time. These characters will stay with me for a long, long time. It meant the world to me. It was so immersive. It was very like character and setting driven, which is my favorite, and the plot and the prose were pretty good too. If those things sound interesting to you too, first of all, we should be best friends, and second of all, you should read this book. Okay, that was the end of my list. The year is coming to an end. I have only been on BookTube for a few months, but it's still, you know, a fake turning point that we have created by making a calendar, and so I'm doing a lot of reflecting on what I want this channel to be moving forward. I just really want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's been here so far and who's been so supportive, and I'm so excited to continue figuring out what I have to offer, what is authentic and fun for me to make, and what is fun for you to watch. I have so many ideas, and I'm just so excited to see where this whole BookTube thing takes me. And a quick side note, if you didn't know, we got 2 little frogs in October, I believe. The loves of my life. And last week we got a puppy named Dipper, like Gravity Falls. Look forward to not only so many cats, but also so many frogs and a puppy in upcoming videos. But speaking of the puppy, it is my turn to go babysit. So I will see you next time. Please like, subscribe, comment. Did you read any of these books? Did I convince you to read any of these books? What were your favorite books of the year? Do you have any recommendations for me based off of these? I'd love to hear it. Thank you so, so, so much for watching and being so supportive, and I'll see you next time in the new year. Goodbye!